Nolan Ryan was built for no-hitters, better than anyone else. Let me explain. The no-hitter is one of the greater achievements a pitcher or a team can accomplish in a single game. Since 1903, holding the opposition hitless for an entire game has only been done 317 times. And of that, 238 were accomplished by one pitcher pitching all 9 innings. Out of those, only 28 pitchers have done this multiple times. The vast majority of pitchers who threw multiples only threw 2 of them. And they include some special cases like Johnny Vandermeer, who threw 2 no-hitters in consecutive starts, Max Scherzer, who had 2 in 2015, and legends like Bill Stoneman and Homer Bailey, who managed to make lightning strike twice. The only non-US born player to achieve this feat was Hideo Nomo. One of his no-hitters was in Coors Field, and I have a video on that explaining how preposterous that achievement is. Justin Verlander has thrown 3, and he is well deserving of all of them. Second place is Sandy Koufax, throwing 4 no-nos, another sign of an incredibly dominant pitcher. There's one more, and if you've read or seen the title and thumbnail, you know who he is. It's Nolan Ryan. And how many did he throw? 7. How do you throw 7? How do you throw 7? I'll try and find that out, as well as rating all 7 of Nolan Ryan's no-hitters. Let's look at tools, or more specifically, what made it possible for Nolan Ryan. The important parts of the no-hitter are hits, obviously, strikeouts, and walks. And to a lesser extent, whip is also cool to look at. The easiest way to get a no-hitter is to make sure the ball is put in play as little as possible, while also throwing strikes, enough to avoid more than a handful of walks over 9 innings. Throughout Nolan Ryan's career, he played for a long time. These were the Major League Baseball averages for hits per 9, strikeouts per 9, walks per 9, and whip. And here's Nolan. Obviously, the low hits are conducive for achieving no-hitters, and his strikeout per 9 is nearly double the average, a man ahead of his time. But the downside is the absolute preponderance of walks, which is what ultimately raises his whip above 1. To give you an idea, the average whip of Major League Baseball is about 27% walks and 73% hits. Nolan Ryan's is 42% walks and 58% hits, which is a stark difference. Let's add Koufax and Verlander to this equation. Verlander is right in line with Major League Baseball's averages through 2020, but Koufax has a difference of 4%, which is a little more toward the walk side, but not nearly as much as the difference that Nolan Ryan had, of 15%. Of the 3, Koufax was the stingiest when it came to base runners in general, so it made sense that once he locked down his control, positive results would follow. Now, with all that information, I'm going to take a quick detour, but we'll get back to Nolan Ryan's no-hitters. We can use these parameters to determine pitchers who have had, or currently have, the best chance of pitching a no-hitter based off of these stats. So if we use the parameters of less than 9 hits per 9, more than 9 strikeouts per 9, and less than 4.7 walks per 9, with a minimum of 1,000 career innings pitched, these are the guys that can do it. Pretty cool, right? But I realized I forgot to mention one thing. Very important. I should have mentioned it earlier. When I was researching this, I was left with this list of 26 pitchers from baseball history that could pitch a no-hitter or have pitched one. Something didn't sit right, and so I went back to look at Nolan Ryan, Koufax, and Verlander's pages to see if there was something that stuck out or something I could do to narrow the list down. They all have one thing in common. Their home run per 9 is under 1. Obviously meaning that over the course of 9 innings, the odds of a home run are less than 1 per complete game. So, I adjusted the list to include that, because in order to pitch a no-hitter, you can't be giving up home runs. That adds both a hit and a run, and that's not how you get no-hitters. We now have a much more concise list, 13 pitchers who all hold similar or greater qualifications to Nolan Ryan, Sandy Koufax, and Justin Verlander. So how effective was this at determining pitchers that can pitch no-hitters, or the capability to pitch no-hitters? Out of the 13 pitchers on this list, 8 of them have accomplished it. That's a pretty good success rate of 61.5% of the pitchers on the list to pitch at least one. It still baffles me that Francisco Liriano pitched a no-hitter, but according to these peripherals, he was perfectly suited for the achievement, so I guess that it made sense that he was able to do it. The pitchers who haven't pitched one are Jacob deGrom, Steven Strasburg, Pedro Martinez, Lance Lynn, and Zach Wheeler. Pedro is the only pitcher who has a 0% chance of pitching a no-hitter, but I think that he's okay. He doesn't need a no-hitter to prove how good of a pitcher he actually was. Strasburg is suffering through tons of arm and shoulder issues, but If he makes a return to form similar to the start of his career, he's still entirely viable to pitch a no-hitter. Lance Lynn was a big surprise to me, but he's got comparable numbers to Tim Lincecum, who's also on this list, so it's not out of the question. The last two are the biggest names on this list, Zach Wheeler and Jacob deGrom. Considering how well these guys have been pitching recently, I will make the bold prediction that one of these two guys will have a no-hitter through the course of their career. And if I'm wrong, great, that's awesome. Here's the reason why. For Wheeler, he's on the cusp of this list with the lowest strikeout per 9, third lowest hit per 9, 6th in home runs per 9, and 7th in walk per 9, and 9th in whip. But look, Liriano was also near the bottom or top of these lists and has one to his name. Now, deGrom, he's set up, well, nicely. He's been designed by the baseball gods to throw no-hitters. And if his start on August 7th, 2022 is any indication, provided he's allowed to pitch 9 innings, it's just a matter of time before baseball gives him his no-hitter. Also, because of all this, I'll say a very hot take, and I'll make a ridiculous claim of saying that it's easier to pitch a perfect game than a no-hitter, because anyone can pitch a perfect game. Okay, now back to the main story on the 7 Nolan Ryan no-hitters. I'll start from the first one he threw and adjust the list to rank where his subsequent ones will go, so you'll be hearing my honest thoughts about where each one should go. A primary method of measuring his success that I'll be using is called game score, among other things. And game score isn't literally the score of the game, but a single number developed by Bill James, which helps determine how good or bad a starting pitcher does in his starts, with 50 being average. The first one is on May 15th, 1973. A 26-year-old Nolan Ryan is pitching for the California Angels and has established himself as a very solid, although wild, pitcher. The opponent is the Kansas City Royals. You know the outcome, so let's stick to it. It's a dominant performance by Ryan. He notches 12 strikeouts along 3 walks, facing 3 batters over the minimum of 27. The result gives him a game score of 96, which is an excellent score in a 9-inning game, as there have only been 112 9-inning games with a score this high. His second no-hitter comes later that season, July 15th, against Detroit. Now, I don't know if he wanted to outdo his performance in the previous no-hitter or not, but he did. With a game score of 100, this is a much more dominant performance, because we can't overlook the fact that he walked 1 more batter at the expense of 5 more strikeouts. Now, the amount of 9-inning complete games with a game score of 100 is much, much smaller, with only 16 games falling into this category. So for that reason, this no-hitter gets ranked above the first one he pitched. With 2 no-hitters in the same season, Ryan becomes a member of an exclusive group of pitchers who pitched 2 no-hitters in a season, with Johnny Vandermeer, Ali Reynolds, and Virgil Trucks being the only ones to do it before, and only Max Scherzer has joined him since. Disclaimer, Nolan Ryan will be joining several exclusive groups throughout this video. The third no-hitter comes next year, September 28th, against Minnesota. He definitely wasn't his sharpest, walking 8 batters and having 35 batters come to the plate. This is his poorest game score of 94. It's the lowest for him, but still higher than the average game score of a no-hitter, which is 92. So he's still performing better than average, but down by his standards. Obviously, this is placed below the other 2. No-no number 4 comes fairly soon, June 1st, 1975, against Baltimore. Now, I know I said his last one was a poor performance by his standards, but this game score comes in at an even lower score of 92, which is right in line with the average no-hitter. But this isn't all that it seems to be. Yeah, it's the worst one by game score, but under the circumstances, it's better than the game score indicates. The result of the game was 1-0, so Ryan was under duress for a while. 35 of the 238 no-hitters were won by a score of 1-0, so about 14.71%. It's the second highest frequency of games, only behind 2-0 finishes. What I would assume happens is that the pitcher still feels like he has the obligation to keep his team ahead despite the lack of run support. A statistic I want to draw your attention to is average leverage index. For those who don't know, average leverage index is a way to determine how much pressure a pitcher withstood throughout the course of a game. 1 is average, below that is low pressure, and above that is high pressure. This one is by far the most pressure he had felt in a no-hitter thus far, with an average leverage index of 1.384, which is over 550 points higher than his next highest average leverage index. I'd place this no-hitter above the one against Minnesota, but below the one against the Royals for these reasons. Before we go to the next no-hitter, Ryan has joined a few elite groups pitching this no-hitter. The first one is the 4 no-no group, occupied by just himself and Koufax. The second is a group of pitchers who threw at least one no-hitter for 3 consecutive years, also joined only by Koufax. The third one does not include Koufax. Sorry, Sandy, but it's still a small group. Nolan Ryan had pitched the last no-hitter in 74 and the first no-hitter in 75, so consecutive. Only Warren Spahn was the pitcher to do it before him, and this list was joined by the legend Homer Bailey, of which people are still surprised that he did it. Nolan Ryan's 5th no-hitter puts him in uncharted territory. Up until then, he and Koufax were tied with 4 each. The 5th happened on September 26, 1981. Nolan Ryan is on the Houston Astros now, and he puts up a standard no-hitter with a game score of 95. He faced 3 over the minimum, similar to how he did in the first one of his career, but with 1 less strikeout. This was his first no-hitter against a postseason-bound team, the Los Angeles Dodgers, who, on the back of Fernando Valenzuela, won the World Series that year. So these were his most formidable opponents to date. Due to that difficulty, I venture to say that at this point it is the second most impressive no-hitter he had pitched, only behind the 17 strikeout performance in his second no-hitter. Nolan Ryan is alone at the top, but there's nowhere to go but up, and for a while, that looked like the ceiling. From 1982 through 1989, he only pitched 2 9-inning complete games with a game score north of 92. His closest chance was a game against the Angels, ironically enough, where he had given up 2 singles after 7 1/3 perfect innings, which, throughout my research, is the closest he's gone flirting with the elusive perfect game. But the ageless Ryan couldn't be thwarted for long, and in 1990, on the Texas Rangers now, he pitched his 6th no-hitter. It was one of his most impressive to date, with 14 strikeouts paired with only 2 walks. He faced the lowest amount of batters in a no-hitter to date, but I'd put this one as his second most impressive one, as he was under way less pressure throughout the no-hitter compared to the performance in 1973. So for that, as of now, it's the second most impressive one. All right, we're down to the last one. Nolan Ryan is 44 now, and the victims are the members of the Toronto Blue Jays. What was Ryan's game score for this one? It's the highest 9-inning game score of his career. Throughout the history of American and National League Baseball, that game is one of 7, with a game score of 101 or higher. The other games are 3 no-hitters, 2 perfect games, and Kerry Wood's dominant performance in 1998, which is widely understood as one of the greatest pitch games of all time in Major League Baseball. The Blue Jays are no slouch of a team either. They would go on to the ALCS that year and win the World Series the next 2. This team would flail fruitlessly with every batter striking out at least once, and 3 of them receiving golden sombreros. 4 baseballs reached the outfield. The rest were either infield outs or strikeouts. That is dominance of a different variety. The Jays could not hit anything he was throwing. On Baseball Reference, there's a summary of the top 5 plays of the game by win probability added. And he held the Jays so helpless that none of their plate appearances were consequential enough in the grand scheme of the game to show up here. The most influential play that happened for the Blue Jays was a fouled pop fly by Greg Myers to the Rangers' third baseman, Steve Bichelle. When a team is so thoroughly overmatched that their best play is a play not even in fair territory, you just have to tip your cap to the pitcher. This is his best no-hitter by a long shot. Nolan Ryan was one of the most dominant pitchers in baseball history, doing something that has never been done before or since. He put together such a large body of work and set records in so many areas that his footprint on baseball will be visible for an eternity. Of the records he now holds, career walks, career strikeouts, career hit per 9, and 7 no-hitters, the most attainable of these records is the hits per 9 innings, with both Clayton Kershaw and Jacob deGrom close enough to challenge it. For career walks, he's got that covered. No one will walk as many as he had again. His career strikeout record holds the same distance as his career walk record, so another insurmountable height. But probably the most impossible of all is 7 games of surrendering no hits to the opposing team for 9 innings. He didn't get a perfect game, but he got 7 games that were about as good. Thanks for watching.